the continuation of the impeachment trial. Because ang sabi ni Tito Sen is when the 20th Congress opens, he is sure that it will be brought up, the legality of the continuity. And there is the Duterte bloc who may want to not pursue the impeachment trial. Dun tayo, sir.
Okay, first of all, I agree with you, Karen. The Duterte bloc would not want to continue the impeachment trial. That is why they will try every ground in order to stop the impeachment trial going to the Supreme Court, and letting the Supreme Court rule as to the jurisdiction issue is perfectly within the right of the Duterte bloc. Ang masama lang dyan, yan pong kung anuman ang katotohanan ay itatago po sa isang labanan ng technical, yung question of jurisdiction. The question of jurisdiction is a technical matter, and because of the ruling on the jurisdiction, you can prevent the people from knowing and holding accountable certain officials of government when that is a process that is outlined in the Constitution.
Alright, magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Opinion and Reaction PH. Muli po tayo nagbabalik sa napakagandang reaction video. Panoorin at reaksyonan po natin itong interview ni Karen Davila kay ex-senator Franklin Drilon na para bagang umaalma dito sa impeachment trial kung bakit ba sobrang delay na. Pero bago po tayo magpatuloy sa ating reaction video, huwag nyo naman pong kalimutan pindutin ang like, share at subscribe.
All right, joining us this morning on Hot Copy, we have former Senate President Franklin Drilon. Good morning to you, sir. All right, sir, you're on mute.
There you are, yes.
All right, Senator, good morning once again. Let's start over. Good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Thank you for having me today.
All right. Now, I think it's important that we set the tone and make our viewers understand what does this exactly mean. With Senate President Cheese Escudero moving the reading of the charges from June 2 to June 11, which is the last day of the 19th Congress. What does this mean for the impeachment case?
At bottom, it is a question of whether or not the impeachment complaint filed in the 11th Congress and
19th Congress.
in the 19th
11th. 19th.
sorry,
Go ahead.
19th. Yes, the question is whether or not the impeachment complaint filed in the 19th Congress, and where under the Constitution the hearing must start and which were tried immediately, can cross over to the 20th Congress, because from the way the calendar is presented by the Senate President, they cannot finish the impeachment trial. Question, can the, I repeat, question, would the 20th Congress have the authority to continue the impeachment trial? In my personal view, there is basis to continue the trial in the 20th Congress. Why? Number one, the Senate is a continuing body, and the impeachment court has its own calendar and can be argued to be a continuing body. Second, under our Constitution, the obligation to try the case continues until it is decided. And it does not mention about one Congress or the other. Yes, I admit this is a question of first impression, but in my view, there is enough basis to argue that the impeachment trial can cross over to the next Congress. I repeat, the Senate is a continuing body. The impeachment court has its own life and its own calendar, and it is under the Constitution, it is the obligation of the Senate to try the impeachment court and try the impeachment complaint. And the Senate, I repeat, is a continuing body, and that's an accepted tradition and legal proposition in the Senate.
Okay, so I'll start first with the practicality of the schedule, right? Before we move on to the rules. June 11 is the last day of the 19th Congress. That's when the charges will be presented, right? And read.
No.
Go on.
No, June 11 is not the last day.
Okay.
The last day of the regular session of the 19th Congress is June 30,
Okay.
when the 11th Congress and 20th Congress takes over on July 1.
Okay, so, but July 11, after that, they go on Sine Die, right?
Because on July 11, under the calendar, both houses ends their session, but the Congress itself remains alive until June 30, but no sessions are held anymore between June 11 and June 30 by virtue of the calendar agreed by both houses.
Okay, so if the charges are read by June 11, can the Senate convene as an impeachment court on June 12? One, that's a holiday. And I mean, take us through the process, because at the end, from our regular legislative body, they'd have to convene as an impeachment court and take their oath. What happens with that setup, that schedule?
All right. It is the constitutional duty of the Senate to convene as an impeachment court when on June 2. But all right, on June 11, that obligation still is there because it has not been addressed. So what is the first item on the agenda is to convene the Senate into an impeachment court. And at that point, the impeachment court has its own, is a separate entity from the Senate and would have its own calendar, would have its own life. It is called sui generis, one of its kind. That's what the impeachment court is all about. And they can approve the rules, etc. And inevitably, because of the lateness of the hour, it would have to cross over to the next Congress, the 20th Congress. So a lot of questions are raised. Can the impeachment court cross over to the next Congress? The answer is yes. We apply the rules with similar rules in the Senate. Example, the Supreme Court. If there are new justices, does the Supreme Court, does it mean that the new justices cannot participate in the case that comes after they are or before they were appointed, that came before they were appointed? The Court of Appeals, the same thing. The Court of Appeals, the justices, the terms of the office of the justice or the retirement date comes differently, but it is a continuing body and therefore can continue hearing the cases which were filed before they assumed office. That is the situation in the Senate and the impeachment court can be applied, or the situation in the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals can be applied by analogy to the impeachment court. There is nothing in the rules which would prohibit the new members from sitting as senator judges in the 20th Congress. So, in my view, it can continue.
Okay, so tagalugin po natin yan, no, para sa mas maraming manonood. Ang sinasabi, kumbaga inihalin tulad nyo ang impeachment court sa pangkaraniwang korte. Tulad ng Court of Appeals, Supreme Court, kapag nagpalit ng huwes, kapag nagpalit ng justice at hindi pa tapos ang kaso, tuloy-tuloy pa rin ang pagdinig ng kaso kahit nagbago na ang huwes.
Tama po yan. Dahil yung Supreme Court, yung Court of Appeals at ang impeachment court ay collegial body. Ibig sabihin, hindi lang isa ang nagdedesisyon, kung hindi yung kabuuan ng sa Court Suprema, 11 o 15, yung Court of Appeals, 3, at sa impeachment court ay collegial court yan, 24 na senator judges. At hindi ibig sabihin, dahil nag-expire na ang termino ng ibang senator judge ay hindi na po pwedeng ipagpatuloy. Wala pong rason at ang tungkulin ng Senado sa ating saligang batas ay ipagpatuloy at agad dinggin ang isang impeachment complaint.
Okay, so you have lawyers citing Rule 44, Section 123 of the Senate when it comes to unfinished business on all pending matters and proceedings shall terminate upon the expiration of one Congress but may be taken by the succeeding Congress as if presented for the first time. Malinaw naman po that you can't file another impeachment complaint against the same official within a 1-year period. Pero when they quote Section 123 of Rule 44, do you believe this covers the impeachment case against the Vice President?
No, Karen, no. Because that section cited is applicable to bills and resolutions.
At malinaw ba yun? Malinaw ba yun only for
Yan,
bills?
sa rules of the Senate yan eh. Hindi naman, yung sinasabi dyan, pag yung isang panukalang batas, hindi po natapos doon sa halimbawa sa 19th Congress, kailangan i-refile muli doon sa 20th Congress. Hindi naman po ito impeachment complaint, hindi naman po ito panukalang batas o resolution. Kaya hindi po, sa akin po, hindi applicable yan.
Oo. Okay. Now, meron din kasing impeachment rules ang Senado which actually, I don't know why it's not coded, but RG Cruz actually sent this. And one of the impeachment rules, I want to know if this was present during your time or this was newly done. It says, upon presentation of the articles to the Senate shall specify the date and time, so and so. It shall continue in session from day to day except Saturdays, Sundays, non-working holidays until final judgment shall be rendered and so much longer as may in its judgment be necessary. Ito ba existing na to nung panahon pa po ni dating Pangulong Erap Estrada, ni Supreme Court Justice Corona?
Ang sa pagkaalam ko, yan pa rin ang rules noon. Wala pong pinago dyan. Kaya yan po ay nanatiling effective as of today.
Oo. Na nakalagay, pagtatagalugin natin, basta kailangan hindi huminto hanggang judgment is rendered. Kumbaga, magbigay ng desisyon ang impeachment court. Kahit gaano katagal, gaano kabilis.
Tama po yan, Karen. Kaya yan po ay sumusuporta doon sa aking sinasabi na pwedeng tumawid ang impeachment complaint from the 19th to the 20th Congress. Dahilan po, binasa nyo nga that dapat tuloy-tuloy hanggang magampanan ang tungkulin ng Senado at ng impeachment court to hold a official accountable through an impeachment process. Yan po ang reasonable interpretation ng ating saligang batas at ang tungkulin ng Senado.
Okay, so now let's talk about the politics of it all. We've already talked about the rules. When I interviewed former Senate President Tito Soto, and he's openly said that if he has the votes to be Senate President, of course, that he would take it. And you also have, of course, Senate President Chis Escudero that is also making a run, party mates, by the way, making a run once again for the Senate presidency. A new bloc has evolved and come out of the Senate. Dati kasi majority and opposition lang. Ngayon, meron ng Alyansa Marcos Bloc, meron ng minority opposition which is Risa Ontiveros, Bam Aquino, Kiko Pangilinan, pero meron na ngayong Duterte block, right? So how does this play into even number one, first, the continuation of the impeachment trial? Because ang sabi ni Tito Sen is when the 20th Congress opens, he is sure that it will be brought up, the legality of the continuity. And there is the Duterte bloc who may want to not pursue the impeachment trial. Dun tayo, sir.
Okay, first of all, I agree with you, Karen. The Duterte bloc would not want to continue the impeachment trial. That is why they will try every ground in order to stop the impeachment trial, going to the Supreme Court and letting the Supreme Court rule as to the jurisdiction issue is perfectly within the right of the Duterte bloc. Ang masama lang dyan, yan pong kung anuman ang katotohanan ay itatago po sa isang labanan ng technical, yung question of jurisdiction. The question of jurisdiction is a technical matter, and because of the ruling on the jurisdiction, you can prevent the people from knowing and holding accountable certain officials of government when that is a process that is outlined in the Constitution. So the Constitution requires that there be a continued trial until a decision is rendered. Now, of course, jurisdiction is something that must be brought up because of the peculiarity of the situation where we are today. During my time as twice as a senator judge, the impeachment trial was held within the same, during the life of the same Congress where the complaint was filed. But to me, that doesn't make a difference because the impeachment court is a separate and juridical separate body and can make its own rules and is governed by its own rules, not by the rules of the Senate or of the House, but only by the Constitution.
Okay, because Senate President Cheese Escudero said the Senate cannot bind the next Congress on Sara Duterte's impeachment. And I'll read to you some of the options that the Senate President has said, I guess in a press conference. He said, most of Duterte's impeachment, of course, will happen in the 20th Congress, and he did acknowledge the possibility that it might not proceed at all. So the quote is, the 19th Congress cannot bind subsequent Congresses or any Congresses for that matter. And he even said, in theory, the current plenary could opt not to convene on June 11 at all. So where is this coming from? Is this a political matter?
Yes, I would put it this way. I agree with Cis that the 19th Congress cannot bind the 20th Congress, but we have only one Constitution. And the Constitution says an impeachment complaint, the Senate must try it forthwith. And the impeachment court, once constituted, has a life of its own. And the Senate is a continuing body. And therefore, that it is not a question of whether or not the 19th Congress can bind the 20th Congress. Question is, don't we have a constitution which is binding on all members of Congress, on all Congresses? And the Constitution says the Senate, acting as an impeachment court, must try the impeachment complaint forthwith. Ibig sabihin, kaagad nililitisin.
But then there's politics to consider, and that's the reality. No, you've been there for, how many years, Senator? How many years were you in the Senate? Would it be 50? 40?
24.
24. Wag naman sumobra. Wag kita patandain ng sobra-sobra. Pero 24 years. And the truth of the matter is during the midterm elections, we've seen that Visayas and Mindanao really went Duterte, right? During the elections. They've spoken. The people have spoken. And you have 12 of the senators that are going to run in 2028. So the politics of it all, will it matter in terms of the Senate actually deciding when they say, let's take a vote? They might do that, it's a collegial body. If it's brought up in the 20th Congress, what if they say, let's take a vote? Who wants to continue the impeachment trial and who believes that this should first be solved by the Supreme Court? Who believes that the 20th Congress should not take up this matter? What happens then? I mean, the Constitution is clear to you, but what happens then?
Well, that is the nature of the system that we have. I want to emphasize that the impeachment court is not a judicial body. That is why it is called sui generis, one of its kind. And of course, inevitably politics will creep in, and not all issues will be decided by the impeachment court on the basis of solely of the Constitution and the law, although they should do it because many of them, a number of them, not their fault, are not lawyers. So,
And this is a political exercise too, right? May ganon.
Partly a political exercise, partly a legal exercise. So those two interests converge in the impeachment court. That's how it was structured. So these questions inevitably arise, and at the end of the day, it is the Supreme Court who will interpret what it is all about.
Okay, but that's another question. Could this lead into a constitutional crisis? At the end of the day, the judicial, executive, and legislative are equal branches of government. So I did ask Tito Sen this. Yes, there's a petition before the Supreme Court, and there might be another one in terms of the continuity of the 20th Congress. But if the Supreme Court decides on the matter, doesn't that put the Supreme Court above the Senate?
Well, the Supreme Court can argue that under the Constitution they can correct any form of a grave abuse of discretion. And it is on this basis that the Supreme Court has reviewed many acts of the legislature and the executive. This power of the Supreme Court was not in the 1935 or 1972 Constitution. It is only when the Constitutional Commission crafted our Constitution of 1970 or 1987 that the Supreme Court was given the power to correct grave abuse of discretion without distinction as to which branch committed grave abuse of discretion. That is why it is argued with force that the Supreme Court can correct any abuse of discretion, including that of the President, including that of Congress, including that of the Senate, if in their judgment the discretion granted to these bodies were gravely abused. Now, question, will they exercise that power in the case of the impeachment court? Well, only the gods of Padre Faura would have the answer to that.
Okay. Now, there are two Supreme Court decisions, and I want to ask you this because it may be brought up at the opening of the 20th Congress. So one that's quoted often is the Balag versus Senate Supreme Court ruling that states, to make it short, that the Senate is not a continuing body. So all pending matters, including unpassed bills and proceedings, will be terminated at the close of Congress. And yet there's another Supreme Court decision, the Arnault versus Nazareno, that holds the Senate may continue the trial beyond June 30, since the power of impeachment is not legislative and does not expire with each Congress. So you have two right there that incoming senators may use against each other. So when you have two right there, it's all a matter of numbers.
Well, initially, that's correct. It is all a matter of numbers because the decisions in the Senate would be governed or would be brought about by those who has a higher number and not necessarily based on what the law or the Constitution is, but the numbers in the Senate. Iba po sa Korte Suprema. While they're also voting, they are under obligation to base their decisions on the legal interpretation of the statute or the Constitution. That's the basic difference.
Okay, so if I were to ask you a hypothetical question, can the 19th Congress refuse to convene as an impeachment court?
I'm sorry?
Can the 19th Congress refuse to convene as an impeachment court?
They cannot. That's an obligation of the Constitution. Do not ask me what is the remedy, because I do not have a remedy. But that's a constitutional duty.
So in other words, it's not possible that suddenly it's brought to the floor and they'll say, with a few days ending, and we won't finish this. I don't think we should take this up in the 19th Congress. Hindi pwede yun. And then they suddenly say, let's take a vote. Is that possible?
Hindi po pwede yun. It is their constitutional duty to convene themselves into an impeachment court. And that has happened twice or three times in the past. I was there. We had to proceed with the impeachment court, formation of the impeachment court. It is not it is not discretionary on the part of the Senate not to convene the impeachment court, because under the Constitution, the moment the Senate receives the impeachment complaint, they should try it forthwith, meaning immediately.
Yon. Hindi ko po maintindihan kung bakit mga gigil na gigil sila dito sa impeachment trial. No? Yung pangunahing dahilan po ng mga senador, nag-aabang daw po ang taong bayan. Ginawa po nilang telenovela itong impeachment trial para kay Vice President Sara Duterte, no? Nakakatawa lang isipin, no? Kasi talagang gusto po nilang pabagsakin itong mga Duterte sapagkat sila ang humahadlang dito sa mga black, sa mga maiitim na balak nila dito sa ating bayan para makapagpayaman po sila ng gusto. O bueno, mga kababayan, hanggang dito na lamang po ang ating reaction video. Muli po, ako po si Opinion and Reaction PH. Lagi po kayong mag-iingat at God bless.